Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a really fascinating work. It's The Courage to be Disliked.
Mm-hmm.
It's Ichiro Kishimi interpreting Alfred Adler's insights. And our mission really is to pull out the absolute core ideas for you. You know, a shortcut to understanding personal freedom, happiness, relationships.
It's a great source.
Mm.
And Adler, well, he was a contemporary of Freud's, an early follower, actually.
Right.
But he became Freud's first major dissenter. Big split.
Why was that? What was the core disagreement?
Fundamentally, it was about causality. Freud said your past, your trauma, determines your present. Adler, he had this radical view. He argued, your present situation is, well, it's only related to yourself, your choices now. He called his approach individual psychology.
Okay, and that feels incredibly relevant now, doesn't it? I mean, things change so fast. Technology, ideas, you need to adapt constantly.
Absolutely.
We see people, right, they get early success, lots of applause, but then maybe it fades. And if they haven't built that solid internal self-esteem system, they kind of crumble.
Exactly. That external validation is fickle.
So if the past isn't the defining factor and external praise doesn't last, how does Adler suggest we build that, that inner strength? Where do we start?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Okay, so let's unpack that. The big question first. Where does unhappiness even come from? Whose fault is it, really?
Well, this is Adler's cornerstone. His core idea is simply, you can make your own choices.
Your own choices?
Yes. Your life isn't some script written by others or by your past. No, it's a series of your choices, moment by moment. That's the fundamental break from Freud's causality.
Okay, the book has this really memorable example to illustrate this, right? The girl with the blushing phobia.
Ah, yes, the blushing phobia. She desperately wants to confess her feelings to a boy she likes.
But she feels she can't because she blushes uncontrollably. She thinks, if only I didn't blush, I'd tell him right away.
Right. And the typical sort of Freudian take would be to look for a cause in her past. Maybe some childhood trauma, being shamed, a bad heartbreak. Something caused this phobia.
Makes sense on the surface. Cause and effect.
It does. But Adler just fundamentally disagreed with that cause and effect logic for present problems. He argued that if your past dictates your present, then your present and future are basically fixed. You're stuck.
No agency.
Exactly. And this is where Adler flips the script. He introduces teleology, purpose, goal-driven thinking.
Purpose. So the blushing has a purpose.
According to Adler, yes. He'd say the blushing phobia is, in a sense, her choice.
Okay, hang on. Her choice. That sounds harsh. She obviously doesn't want to blush like that.
Not consciously, no. But Adler looks at the unconscious goal or purpose the phobia serves. What's she most afraid of? Not the blushing itself, maybe.
Rejection, if she confesses and he says no.
Precisely. The pain of potential rejection. By having the phobia, she creates a reason not to confess. She can tell herself, I can't be with him because of this blushing. It shields her from that potential pain.
Okay, so she avoids the risk.
And she gets to live in this kind of comforting fantasy. If only this blushing were gone, everything would work out. So the phobia serves the purpose of avoiding hurt and maintaining a what-if. It's a choice to maintain the status quo to avoid a specific fear.
Wow. Okay, but let's push on that a bit. If someone listening is dealing with, say, depression or anxiety, is Adler really saying that's just a choice?
Yeah.
That you could just choose happiness? It feels a little like blaming the victim.
That's a really important point and a common reaction. Adler isn't saying you consciously woke up and decided, I think I'll be depressed today.
Right.
Or that it's easy to fix.
Right.
What he's saying is that the state you're in, even unhappiness, serves a present purpose for you. It's a strategy, maybe unconscious, that you've adopted to avoid something you perceive as worse. Maybe failure, maybe responsibility, maybe confrontation.
So the problem isn't just a result of the past.
No. It's a tool being used now. And the key insight, the hopeful part, is that if it's a tool you're using, you can also choose to put it down. So the statement, your current unhappiness is precisely because you yourself chose unhappiness, isn't about blame. It's about empowerment. It means you also have the power to choose differently. You cannot change because you have decided not to change. That decision is the key.
That reframing is crucial. Okay, this connects to another idea Adler pioneered, right? The inferiority feeling.
Yes, exactly. Nicht, in the original context discussed in the book, he was the first to really define it, that feeling of low self-worth when you compare yourself to others.
And we all feel that sometimes.
Absolutely. Adler said it's universal. We're born relatively helpless, right? That feeling drives us. It makes us want to strive, to grow, to overcome. Think of a baby learning to walk or speak.
That's pursuing superiority in a way, overcoming limitations.
Exactly. Or even scientific progress throughout history. That comes from feeling a limitation and striving to surpass it. So the feeling of inferiority isn't bad in itself. It's actually a powerful engine for progress.
But then there's the inferiority complex. That's different. Sibashinji.
Very different. That's when you take that feeling of inferiority and turn it into an excuse.
Like, oh, I can't get a date because I'm not attractive enough, or I'll never succeed because I didn't go to the right college, that kind of thing.
Precisely. That because of A, I can't possibly do B logic. It's using the feeling as a shield.
I mean, let's be honest, who hasn't done that on a bad day? Oh, I can't finish this project because I'm just not organized enough. It lets you off the hook.
It does. It becomes a convenient way to avoid challenging yourself, to avoid the risk of failure, and crucially, Adler would say, to avoid the difficulties inherent in interpersonal relationships. You protect yourself by saying, it's not my fault I can't engage, I'm inherently flawed.
And it's still a choice, in Adler's view.
Still a choice. And then there's the flip side, the superiority complex. Yet needing to constantly prove you're better than others, putting people down, bragging. It stems from that same deep-seated inferiority feeling, but it's masked by this need to appear superior. It's also relational trouble. These people aren't happy either. They're often anxious, constantly comparing.
So whether it's feeling inferior or needing to feel superior, it all seems to circle back to other people.
Exactly. Which leads to Adler's really bold statement. All human troubles come from interpersonal relationships.
Wow, all of them.
According to him, yes. If you wanted to eliminate all worries, you'd literally have to live alone in the universe.
That's quite a thought.
But the takeaway isn't to become a hermit. It's to understand that our reality isn't fixed by the past, but by the meaning we assign to things now, and that meaning, that choice, is ours. That's why Adlerian psychology is fundamentally a psychology of courage.
The courage to, what? Choose differently, assign new meaning.
Yes, and even the courage to face the consequence of living authentically, which might mean being disliked.
Okay, so that's a perfect transition. If unhappiness is a choice tied to relationships, how do we get out of that? How do we find freedom and happiness? How do we get this courage to be disliked?
Right. So Adler talks about navigating our life tasks. Since all troubles are relational, these tasks are fundamentally social: work, friendship, and love.
Okay.
But tackling these isn't about, pleasing everyone or managing your social network perfectly. It's about building that internal self-esteem system we talked about earlier, the one that doesn't rely on external validation.
So how do we do that practically?
One of the key tools Adler gives us is task separation, a only.
Task separation, okay.
Let's use that classic example. A child who just won't study, prefers video games, ignores homework.
Ah, yes, the eternal struggle. Parents usually try everything, right? Nagging, rewards, punishment, tutoring.
Everything. We try to make them study,
Yeah.
But Adler says, hold on, before you intervene, ask, whose task is this?
Whose task? Okay, so who faces the consequences if the child doesn't study?
The child, right. Bad grades, maybe not getting into the school they want. Those consequences fall directly on the child, not the parent.
So studying is the child's task.
Exactly. When a parent constantly forces or nags the child to study, they're interfering in the child's task. And that interference is where conflict brews. Adler believed many, maybe most, interpersonal problems come from either interfering in someone else's tasks or allowing them to interfere in yours.
Okay, but this isn't just letting the kid run wild, right? It sounds a bit like neglect if you just say, not my problem.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Task separation isn't about abandoning the child. Adler emphasized support. Parents should let the child know they're there to help if asked. They create a safe environment.
So offer resources. Be available.
Yes, be ready to support, be protective, but don't meddle or dictate in their task. You don't take over the steering wheel. It's a fine line, but crucial. How do we support without controlling? That's the key question. It's about empowering them to handle their own tasks, which builds that internal strength.
That makes sense. Letting them own the consequences, good or bad. So that's the practical side. What about the psychological shift needed? Building that internal self-esteem. Because let's face it, we do care what people think. We want approval. Nobody enjoys being disliked.
It's natural to want connection, yes. But Adler argues that living to meet others' expectations is actually irresponsible.
Irresponsible? How so?
Because you end up living their lives, not your own. If you try to please everyone, 10 different people with 10 different expectations, you'll tie yourself in knots, you'll create contradictions, lose credibility, and ultimately you sacrifice your freedom.
You're constantly shape-shifting.
Exactly. And it's exhausting and ultimately unfulfilling. It's fascinating how universal that desire for approval is, yet how damaging it can be to genuine freedom.
Which brings us back to that core phrase. True freedom is the courage to be disliked. But again, that sounds isolating. Selfish, maybe?
It can sound that way, but Adler wasn't saying go out and try to make enemies.
Right, that's not the goal.
Not at all. Being disliked isn't the aim. It's potential evidence. Evidence that you are living according to your own principles, exercising your own freedom. If you live authentically, inevitably, some people won't like your choices or your path. That's okay.
So it's not about seeking disapproval, but accepting it as a possible byproduct of freedom?
Precisely. Think about it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't let just anyone drive your car, right? So why let everyone else's opinions dictate your emotional state or your life's direction?
Okay, so for you listening, the takeaway here is the price of freedom in your relationships might be that not everyone approves. Not wanting to be disliked, that's my business, my task. But whether you actually dislike me, well, that's your task. It's not really my concern.
That's a perfect way to put it. That's task separation applied to approval.
So where does happiness fit in? If all troubles are relational, but freedom means risking dislike.
But Adler flips it again. Interpersonal relationships are not only the source of all troubles, they are also the source of all happiness.
Okay, how does that work?
He distinguishes between two kinds of happiness. There's a sort of low-level happiness that comes from comparison.
Like getting better grades, earning more money, my kid is better than your kid, that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
exactly. That happiness relies on someone else being lesser. It's competitive, and ultimately, Adler thought, not very stable or fulfilling.
So what's the high-level happiness?
That comes from what he called community feeling. C'est chonchon tu genejue. This is absolutely central. It's a feeling of belonging, of being connected, and crucially, a continuous sense of contribution.
Contribution. So feeling useful, needed.
Yes, feeling that you are contributing value within your communities, family, work, society. Think about very wealthy people who keep working. Often, it's not about the money anymore.
It's about feeling they're still contributing something meaningful.
Exactly. And this sense of contribution, this feeling of your own worth, it doesn't depend on external praise or reward. It's internal. I am contributing value. That feeling is happiness. Importantly, Adler wasn't advocating self-sacrifice. It's not about martyrdom for the community. Your happiness, your sense of contribution ultimately benefits you. It comes back to your own sense of worth.
That's a really powerful idea, a sense of contribution as the root of happiness. You know, reflecting on all this, especially for today, I kind of interpret Adler's philosophy as finding a way to close your own loop.
Close your own loop. How do you mean?
Like making your actions and the meaning you derive from them a self-contained system. For example, if you praise someone, maybe you let go of needing them to react positively. The act of praising, if genuine, has value for you for the kind of person you want to be.
Detaching from the outcome.
Yeah, or like apologizing. There's this idea I read about, an elite-level apology. It's not about whether the other person forgives you, that's their task. It's about genuinely understanding your part, expressing regret, and learning from it for yourself. You close your own loop on the action,
Yeah.
you control your half.
That aligns perfectly with task separation and focusing on your own contribution and growth.
Yeah.
Regardless of external validation or response, it's about internal coherence.
Right.
And it's deep stuff. Ichiro Kishimi himself apparently said that truly getting Adler can take half one's age. You know, if you start at 40, maybe you fully grasp it by 60.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive is definitely just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. It's a starting point for your own exploration.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If your happiness and your freedom really are your own choices, as Adler suggests, what's one choice, maybe just one small one, you can make today to embrace that courage, to be disliked just a little, and step more into your own authentic path?
A good question to carry with you.
Something to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us today.